The morning sun cast long shadows across the Walmart parking lot in Homestead, Florida. A vast asphalt sea shimmering with the promise of another sweltering day. And Linda Carroll, at the age of 56, pushed her shopping cart through the artificially chilled air of the produce section with a practiced, almost somnambulant grace, her movements methodical, as she selected tomatoes, their skins taut and gleaming under the fluorescent lights, and examined heads of lettuce, peeling back a single leaf to check for the telltale signs of brown decay. This was her routine, a carefully constructed bulwark against the vast, echoing emptiness in her life, a series of small, manageable tasks that helped to fill the spaces that had gaped wide and monstrous since that summer day in 1985. The day her only daughter, Melissa, had vanished as if the very fabric of the world had unstitched itself to swallow her whole, taking with her a brand new husband and a brand new car. A canary yellow Ford Thunderbird that had been a specter in Linda's dreams for 12 long years. She was a woman who had learned to live in the quiet aftermath. Her life a long, drawn-out epilogue to a story that had ended too abruptly. The final pages ripped out and burned, leaving only the smoke of unanswered questions to sting her eyes. Each trip to the grocery store, each meticulously planned meal for one, each neatly folded load of laundry was an act of defiance against the chaos that had claimed her child, a testament to her own stubborn survival in a world that had become muted and gray. The shrill, insistent ring of her cell phone, a clunky plastic brick that was still a relatively new possession in 1997, a prize she had won from a scratch-off ticket given to her by a cheerful supermarket cashier, startled her from her pensive thoughts, the sound an alien intrusion into the familiar symphony of rumbling carts and beeping scanners. She fumbled in the cavernous depths of her purse, her fingers brushing against old receipts, a tube of lipstick, and a half-empty pack of tissues, nearly dropping a mesh bag of navel oranges in the process, their bright citrus scent momentarily filling the air as she finally grasped the device and brought it to her ear. "Hello?" Her voice was hesitant, unused to unexpected calls, especially at this hour of the morning. "Mrs. Carroll? Linda Carroll?" The voice on the other end was male, professional, and carried an undercurrent of gravity that immediately sent a jolt of ice water through her veins. "This is Detective Jason Pram from the Homestead Police Department. I need to ask where you are right now." Linda's heart, a tired muscle that had learned to beat at a slow, funereal pace, skipped a beat, then another, hammering against her ribs like a trapped bird. In 12 years, she had received countless calls, each one a cruel spark of hope that was inevitably extinguished, leading to dead-end sightings in other states, crackpot theories from self-proclaimed psychics, and the well-meaning but ultimately useless updates from a police force that had long since relegated her daughter's case to a cold, dusty file cabinet. But something in this detective's tone, a certain lack of preamble, a directness that bordered on urgent, made her grip the phone tighter, her knuckles turning white. "I'm at Walmart," she said, her voice a little breathless, the mundane words sounding absurd in the face of the sudden, terrifying premonition that was blooming in her chest. "I'm doing my grocery shopping. Why? What's happened?" The seconds of silence that followed were an eternity, a chasm of possibility into which all her carefully managed composure began to crumble. "Mrs. Carroll, we need you to come to Everglades National Park. Something related to your daughter, Melissa, and her husband, Brandon, has just resurfaced." The word resurfaced hung in the air, a grotesque and waterlogged image that her mind refused to fully process. The words hit her like a physical blow, a punch to the gut that stole her breath and made the brightly lit aisles swim before her eyes. The phone, her newfangled lottery prize, nearly slipped from her suddenly nerveless fingers. What is it? She whispered, the question a fragile, broken thing. What have you found? The detective's voice was steady, a rock in the swirling tide of her panic. We've recovered the yellow Ford Thunderbird from the Everglades. We need you for identification purposes. We've also contacted the Whitmore family. Can you meet us at the park parking lot via Main Park Road? The car. After all this time, the car. It was the one tangible piece of that day. The gleaming, ostentatious symbol of Brandon's family's wealth and the chariot that was supposed to carry her daughter into a new and wonderful life. Instead, it had become the vessel of their disappearance, the central prop in their vanishing act. What's in the car? Linda's voice cracked, the sound raw with 12 years of unshed tears and unspoken fears, the question she had both longed for and dreaded asking. A part of her didn't want to know, wanted to hang up the phone and go back to examining lettuce, to retreat into the safe, numb routine she had built. But that part of her had died long ago, replaced by a mother's desperate, unyielding need for answers, no matter how monstrous they might be. I'll be there in 20 minutes, she said, the decision made in a heartbeat. Without a second thought, without a glance back at the life she had been living just moments before, she abandoned her half-filled cart in the middle of the aisle, a lonely monument to a morning that had been violently derailed. Other shoppers stared, their faces a mixture of curiosity and annoyance, as she rushed past them, a blur of frantic motion and quiet desperation. But Linda barely noticed them, their world of coupons and shopping lists suddenly alien and distant. Her mind raced as she hurried through the automatic doors and into the thick, humid embrace of the Florida morning. Her aging Honda Civic a familiar, comforting sight in the sprawling lot. The 20-minute drive to Everglades National Park, a route she had avoided for over a decade, felt both endless and terrifyingly brief, a strange, surreal journey through a landscape of memory and dread. As she navigated Main Park Road, the familiar sawgrass prairies stretching out on either side like a vast green ocean, memories flooded back. Memories she had tried so hard to suppress, to sanitize, to reconcile over the years. The police, after an initial flurry of activity, had concluded that Melissa had simply left town voluntarily with Brandon after their wedding. It was, they had explained with a kind of weary resignation, the only reasonable explanation they could offer a grieving mother. Young couple, a new car, a little bit of money from wedding gifts. It was a classic story of starting a new life, of shedding old ties. Linda had never believed it, not really, not in the deepest, most secret chambers of her heart. Her daughter, her sweet, thoughtful Melissa, wouldn't abandon her like that, not without a word. Not after everything they had been through together. Melissa knew what it meant to be raised by a single mother, knew the sacrifices Linda had made, the extra shifts she'd worked at the diner, the dreams she had deferred so that her daughter could have a better life. They were more than mother and daughter. They were allies, a two-person team against the world. But 12 years of unrelenting silence had been a powerful acid, eating away at even her stubborn hope, eroding the bedrock of her certainty. In the quiet, lonely hours of the night, doubt had crept in. She had begun to make a fragile, uneasy peace with the idea that perhaps, just perhaps, her daughter had chosen a new life, a life of wealth and privilege with the Whitmores, over their old one. Maybe the allure of that world had been too strong. Maybe Melissa had been ashamed. Now, with the discovery of that car, that carefully constructed, fragile piece crumbled like wet sand, leaving her exposed and raw on the shores of her original, undiluted grief. The sight that greeted her at the park's main parking lot made her breath catch in her throat, a choked, painful gasp. The area was a chaotic tableau of officialdom. Multiple police vehicles, their lights silently flashing, crowded the lot, creating a dizzying, disorienting kaleidoscope of red and blue against the bright morning sky. Rescue authority vehicles, large and imposing, added to the controlled chaos, their presence suggesting a grim and difficult task. Park rangers, their faces stern under their wide-brimmed hats, directed a slow-moving line of traffic while uniformed officers cordoned off large sections with flapping yellow tape, creating a perimeter around the day's terrible discovery. Linda parked her Honda hastily, the tires squealing in protest, and stepped out on unsteady legs, the ground seeming to shift beneath her feet. A crowd had gathered at a respectful distance, park employees in their green and khaki uniforms, curious tourists with cameras slung around their necks, officials in various suits and uniforms, all murmuring and pointing. But Linda's eyes were drawn, as if by an irresistible magnetic force, to the flatbed trailer at the center of it all. There it sat, a grotesque and waterlogged relic from a buried past, the yellow Ford Thunderbird. Streams of murky brown water still dripped from its undercarriage, forming dark puddles on the asphalt. A thick layer of green algae and mud caked its once pristine surface, obscuring the vibrant color she remembered so vividly. The windows were opaque, coated with a film of sediment that denied any view of the interior. But even through 12 years of submersion, through the decay and the ruin, she recognized it instantly. It was the car. Gregory Whitmore, Brandon's father, had made such a production of gifting it to them for their wedding, insisting on a series of posed photographs with the happy couple standing beside it. His chest puffed out with pride, the car not so much a gift as a statement of his own wealth and generosity. "Mrs. Carroll?" A man approached her, his step sure and steady, his presence cutting through the haze of her shock. It was Detective Pram, his weathered face grave, a map of long days and difficult cases. He was younger than she'd expected from his voice on the phone, perhaps in his early 40s, with the kind of tired, knowing eyes that came from seeing too much human misery. "Detective," she managed, her voice hoarse. She couldn't take her eyes off the car, this monstrous ghost from her past. How did you find it? After all this time?" "Let me introduce you to some people who can explain that better than I can," he said, his voice gentle as he placed a steadying hand on her elbow, and led her toward a small cluster of young people standing near a police cruiser. They were all wearing University of Miami shirts and looked barely older than Melissa had been when she disappeared. Their faces a mixture of excitement, awe, and a dawning understanding of the gravity of their discovery. A young man with sandy hair and earnest, intelligent eyes stepped forward, extending a hand. "Mrs. Carroll, I'm Jake Morrison. We're environmental studies students. We've been working on a project about land transformation in the Everglades, tracking changes in the landscape over the decades using historical satellite imagery." He pulled out a folder and extracted a grainy, pixelated photograph, a relic from the dawn of commercial satellite technology. "We were studying land loss patterns and the encroachment of invasive species when we noticed this anomaly in a 1985 satellite image." He pointed to a specific section of the photo, a dark patch of water where Linda, squinting, could just make out a tiny, indistinct yellow shape, partially visible through the dark water and surrounding vegetation. When we enhanced and cross-referenced the image with more advanced software, we could clearly see the shape and color of a vehicle. Our professor, Dr. Albright, he remembered the old missing persons case from that year. It was big news back then, the wealthy groom and his bride vanishing. So we calculated the coordinates from the image's geodata and contacted the police. Detective Pram took over the explanation, his voice a low, steady rumble against the backdrop of official activity. "The area where they spotted it is incredibly remote, a deep water slough that's not on any of the standard park trails or boating routes. It's a place you'd have to know about, not stumble upon. The water depth there is significant, deep enough for a car to sink completely and settle into the mud over time. It just disappeared from view." The recovery operation was complex, took almost 4 hours this morning. The Marine Recovery Team from Miami-Dade PD worked with Florida Fish and Wildlife in our department. We used side-scan sonar equipment to confirm the car's exact position, then brought in divers to attach the lift cables. A police boat couldn't get all the way in, so we had to use a heavy lift helicopter to hoist it out and place it on the flatbed for transport. Just then, Linda heard the solid, expensive slam of car doors behind her. She turned to see the Whitmore family arriving, a somber procession of wealth and influence. Gregory led the way, his 60-something frame still carrying his characteristic swagger. A man accustomed to being in charge of every room he entered. Eleanor, his wife, followed a few steps behind, her face a mask of carefully maintained composure, her posture radiating a familiar air of long-suffering dignity. And bringing up the rear was their younger son, Daniel, his expression a mixture of shock and sadness. The years had changed them all. Gregory's hair was now more silver than black. Eleanor's face was etched with fine lines of worry, and Daniel was no longer a college kid but a man in his 30s. But Linda recognized them instantly, and with that recognition came a flare of the old, bitter anger she had worked so hard to bury. She remembered their last interaction in the early days of the investigation with painful clarity. Gregory's thinly veiled accusations, his insistence that her daughter, his daughter from the wrong side of the tracks, had somehow led his precious university-educated son astray, as if love could be measured by bank accounts and zip codes. Detective Pram excused himself to brief the Whitmores, and Linda watched the exchange from a distance, her gaze fixed on Gregory's face as he examined the ruined vehicle. She saw the flicker of recognition, the subtle clenching of his jaw, despite his attempt at stoic control. "Yes, that's the Thunderbird," Gregory confirmed, his voice accustomed to command carrying clearly across the parking lot. "I bought it for Brandon as a wedding gift. The license plate matches FTB 1985. I had it specially requested. Ford Thunderbird, 1985. Linda, steeling herself, approached the group, her own grief momentarily eclipsed by a burning need for information. "What did you recover from inside?" she asked, her voice directed at Detective Pram, but her eyes locked on Gregory. The detective's expression grew more somber, his gaze softening with pity. "Mrs. Carroll, given the 12 years of water damage, the interior was almost completely filled with mud and sediment. No remains were found. There was no blood evidence or any signs of a struggle that we could detect at the scene, though the forensic team will do a more thorough examination back at the lab. The only item of note we recovered was this." He signaled to a uniformed officer who brought over a clear evidence bag containing a single tarnished object. It was a silver Zippo-style lighter, its surface corroded and dull. Gregory, seeing it, reached into the pocket of his tailored slacks and produced an identical, though pristine, lighter. "This one is mine," he said, flicking it open and shut with a practiced motion. "That one must be Brandon's. We bought them together at that little tobacconist shop in Miami, Christmas of 1984. Eleanor's carefully maintained composure finally cracked, a fissure in the porcelain mask. "Detective, what does this mean?" Her voice trembled. "If they're not in the car, where are they? What happens now?" Detective Pram's gaze shifted from Eleanor to Gregory, his tired eyes holding a new, hard glint. "Mrs. Whitmore, I don't believe for a second that your son and daughter-in-law would deliberately dispose of their vehicle, especially a valuable wedding gift like this in a remote corner of the Everglades. This wasn't an accident, and it wasn't a joyride gone wrong. Someone did this to them in 1985. Someone drove this car out here and sank it, trying to eliminate every trace of evidence. This is no longer just a missing persons case. It's now officially a potential criminal investigation." "Criminal?" Eleanor's hand flew to her throat, her eyes wide with a new dawning horror. You mean, you mean someone might have killed them? We're exploring all possibilities, the detective said, his voice firm. But whoever did this knew the area well. They knew exactly where the deep water was, how to access this remote location without being seen. This suggests someone local, someone with knowledge of the park's hidden geography. Gregory's face, which had been pale with shock, now flushed a deep, angry red. Before you start wasting taxpayer money on wild goose chases and conspiracy theories, you need to send your divers back out there. Search for bodies. They might still be underwater, washed away by the currents. Our dive teams are conducting grid pattern searches of the surrounding area as we speak, Mr. Whitmore, Pram replied coolly. We will expand the grid if necessary. Gregory, apparently dissatisfied with the detective's response, turned abruptly to his younger son Daniel, his voice dropping to a harsh whisper, but still audible to those standing nearby, including Linda. This is why it's important to never marry into desperation, Daniel. Poor girls will either ruin your name or get you destroyed. Just like what happened to your brother. The words, so casually cruel, so steeped in prejudice, hit Linda with the force of a slap. Daniel's shock was evident on his face. Dad, what are you talking about? You know how much Brandon loved Melissa. She would never... But Linda's control, worn thin by 12 years of grief and a morning of renewed trauma, finally snapped. Are you still trying to blame my daughter for this? She demanded, her voice rising, shaking with a fury she hadn't felt in years. After all this time, you stand here next to the car they vanished in and you blame her? Gregory rounded on her, his eyes blazing with a mixture of anger and contempt. She might have had connections you don't know about. Old boyfriends, gang members from that neighborhood of hers. Someone who got jealous and decided to eliminate my son to get to her. Gang members? Linda's voice rose to a near shriek, laced with bitter, incredulous laughter. My daughter sang in the church choir. She volunteered at the food bank. If my daughter just wanted your money, Mr. Whitmore, she wouldn't have disappeared with your son. She would have stayed right by his side to collect it. Don't you dare stain her memory with your disgusting accusations. Gregory stepped forward, his posture aggressive, his face inches from hers. Your son is the one who lured her away from her purity promise. Linda shot back, the words tumbling out, a long-held secret weaponized in her rage. She wanted to wait until marriage, that's how I raised her, but he convinced her otherwise. That's why they had to get married so young. Melissa was only 24. The argument escalated rapidly, a volcano of stored-up resentment and class-based animosity erupting in the middle of the police investigation. Voices rose, accusations flew like poisoned darts, and other visitors, drawn by the commotion, stopped to stare, their curiosity turning the family's private tragedy into a public spectacle. Uniformed officers, sensing the potential for violence, moved to intervene, creating a physical barrier between the two feuding families, their bodies a human wall against the tide of anger. That's enough! Detective Pram's authoritative voice cut through the chaos like a knife. This behavior is not helping anyone. You are both grieving, you are both confused, I understand that, but throwing accusations around is not going to bring us any answers. He gently but firmly guided Linda away from the confrontation, his hand on her arm. Mrs. Carroll, please, everyone's emotions are running high. Don't let him provoke you. He's painting my daughter as some kind of criminal, Linda said, her voice shaking with a potent cocktail of rage and unshed tears. My baby girl. My sweet, kind baby girl. I know, the detective said, his voice softening again. We will review everything, every piece of the old file back at the station. For now, I need you to go home and try to rest. This is going to be a long process. I will contact you immediately if there are any new developments. Can you drive yourself, or would you like an officer to escort you? Linda took several deep, shuddering breaths, trying to find her center in the swirling vortex of emotion. I can drive, she said, her voice still trembling. I need a moment. She walked to her car on legs that felt like they were made of jelly, slumping into the driver's seat and letting her head fall back against the headrest. Through her windshield, she could see the Whitmores still clustered around the flatbed trailer. Gregory gesticulating wildly as he spoke to the officers, his body language a symphony of arrogance and entitlement. The sight of him, still so certain of his own righteousness, still so quick to cast blame, made her stomach turn. She turned the key in the ignition, the familiar rumble of the engine a small comfort, and pulled out of the lot, leaving the circus of flashing lights and yellow tape behind. But she couldn't leave behind the image of that water-stained yellow car, or the terrible, urgent questions it had dredged up from the depths about what really happened on that long-ago summer day. Linda's small house felt impossibly quiet, oppressively silent as she closed the front door behind her. The adrenaline that had fueled her through the morning's confrontation drained away, leaving her feeling hollow, shaky, and utterly exhausted. She stood in her small living room for a long moment, the familiar floral-patterned sofa and the collection of family photos on the mantelpiece, seeming to belong to another person's life, a life before the phone call. She was trying to process everything that had happened: the car, the Everglades, the university students, Gregory's venomous accusations, but the thoughts were a chaotic jumble, refusing to settle into any coherent order. Almost without conscious thought, her feet carried her down the narrow hallway, past the closed door of her own bedroom, to the one at the end of the hall, Melissa's room. She hadn't been inside for months, couldn't bear it most days. The room was a preserved wound, a place where time had stopped in June of 1985, and stepping inside was like pressing a finger into the tender, unhealed flesh of her grief. The door creaked as she pushed it open, a sound of disuse and neglect, and a musty, stagnant smell immediately assaulted her nostrils, the scent of trapped air and slow decay. 12 years of neglect had taken their toll. Dust particles thick as a snow flurry danced in the shafts of late afternoon sunlight that streamed through the yellowed, brittle lace curtains. The cheerful floral wallpaper she and Melissa had picked out together on a happy Saturday afternoon, arguing playfully over patterns, was now faded and peeling at the corners. A sad reminder of a brighter time. Everything, absolutely everything, remained exactly as Melissa had left it on that June morning, the morning of her wedding day. A tube of lipstick and a dusting of powder lay scattered on the vanity dresser. A well-thumbed romance novel lay face down on the nightstand, its spine broken, marking her last page. Her favorite yellow sundress, the one that matched her eyes, was draped over the back of her desk chair, as if she had just taken it off and intended to hang it up later. But time, the silent thief, had not been kind to these abandoned treasures. The clothes hanging in the open closet were spotted with mildew. The fabric degraded and discolored, their bright patterns faded to muted ghosts of their former selves. The collection of stuffed animals arranged on the bed, a worn teddy bear, a floppy-eared rabbit, a goofy-looking giraffe, were matted with dust, their button eyes dull and lifeless, staring out into the empty room. "Oh, baby girl," Linda whispered, her throat tight with a fresh wave of sorrow. "What happened to you?" With a sudden burst of energy, a need to do something, anything, to combat the feeling of helpless despair, she threw open the windows, pushing against the swollen wooden frames until they yielded, letting fresh, humid air chase away the staleness. Then, with a new and grim sense of purpose, she went to the garage and fetched cleaning supplies, rags, polish, a vacuum cleaner, and a stack of flattened cardboard boxes. If the police were truly reopening the investigation, they might need to examine Melissa's belongings, and perhaps she thought it was finally time. Time to pack away these painful physical reminders of her loss, to dismantle this shrine to a ghost. She started with the closet, a task that felt both sacrilegious and necessary. She carefully removed each item, her hands shaking as she touched the fabrics her daughter had once worn. She folded Melissa's white high school graduation dress, the memory of her daughter's beaming, hopeful face as she walked across that stage so vivid it was like a physical ache in her chest. Each piece of clothing carried a story, a memory. The blue blouse Melissa wore on her first date with Brandon, a date Linda had worried about endlessly. The denim skirt she had saved up for months to buy from her part-time job at the library. As she cleared the top shelf of the closet, her hands, dusty and grimed, encountered a small pile of items that didn't belong to Melissa. A man's heavy stainless steel watch, a dark blue University of Miami sweater, size large, a half-empty bottle of expensive cologne, its scent still faintly clinging to the air. Brandon's things. Linda's jaw tightened. She had known he stayed over sometimes in the months leading up to the wedding despite her gentle objections. She had raised Melissa with strong, old-fashioned values, had insisted on the importance of purity before marriage, a belief that seemed quaint and outdated even then. But young love, she had discovered, had its own powerful, inexorable rules. And Brandon Whitmore, with his easy charm, his handsome face, and the casual confidence that came with a life of privilege, had been very persuasive. He had swept Melissa off her feet, and look where it had led them, to a muddy grave at the bottom of a swamp. Linda went back to the garage, fetched another box, and began packing Brandon's belongings separately, handling them with a strange mixture of resentment and reverence. A few folded shirts, a collection of cassette tapes, the Police, U2, Bruce Springsteen, a tennis racket with a broken string, and various toiletries. She sealed the box with packing tape and labeled it in thick black marker. Brandon Whitmore. Personal items. The cleaning took nearly 3 hours, a frantic, methodical burst of activity that left her back aching and her hands raw from scrubbing. But by the time she finished, Melissa's room looked better. It was still a shrine, still a testament to a missing daughter. But it was a clean one, a respected one. The boxes of Melissa's life stood stacked neatly against one wall, each one carefully labeled and sealed. Linda loaded the single box of Brandon's things into the trunk of her Honda and sat behind the wheel for a moment, the engine off, debating her next move. The Whitmores lived in the exclusive Gables Estates, a world of manicured lawns and waterfront mansions, a world away from her modest working-class neighborhood in Homestead. She wasn't sure they'd even be home after the morning's traumatic events. But they had household staff, she reasoned, a maid or a groundskeeper who could accept the delivery. It felt important somehow to return these last remnants of their son to close this small, final chapter. The drive took 20 minutes, a journey across a clear and visible class divide. The houses grew larger, the lawns more expansive and unnaturally green. The cars in the driveways more expensive with each passing block. The Whitmore estate sat behind an imposing black iron gate, a sprawling Mediterranean-style mansion of white stucco and terracotta tiles, looking more like a luxury resort than a family home. Linda parked her humble Civic just outside the gate and retrieved the box from her trunk. She had barely stepped out onto the pristine, palm-lined street when Gregory Whitmore himself emerged from the 3-car garage, apparently heading to his gleaming silver Mercedes. His face darkened the instant he saw her, his expression twisting into a mask of pure animosity. "What the hell are you doing here?" His voice was a whip crack across the manicured driveway. "You're blocking the gate. I'm leaving, and you need to leave too." "You're not welcome on this property." Linda, refusing to be intimidated, held up the cardboard box as if it were a shield. "I'm just returning Brandon's belongings. They were in Melissa's room." "Then leave it there." He gestured dismissively at the ground, a flick of the wrist that conveyed utter contempt. Someone will deal with it. Now move your pathetic car. Fighting the overwhelming urge to hurl the box at his arrogant head, Linda took a deep breath, set it carefully on the edge of the pristine driveway, and returned to her car. She pulled forward, allowing enough room for Gregory's Mercedes to reverse past her. He lowered his power window as he passed, his face a thundercloud. I'm leaving shortly, but when I return, I don't want to see you or your piece of junk car anywhere near my property, understood? Without waiting for a response, he gunned the engine and sped off down the street. Linda sat in her car, her hands gripping the steering wheel so tightly her knuckles ached, taking deep, calming breaths. Through her windshield, she could see the cardboard box sitting abandoned on the driveway, a piece of unwanted refuse on the perfect patterned pavers. It bothered her, leaving Brandon's last few possessions there like garbage. It felt disrespectful, not to Gregory but to the memory of the young man her daughter had loved. Making a quick decision, she got out of the car again, retrieved the box, walked with determined steps to the imposing front door and rang the bell. A moment later, the door was opened not by a maid but by Daniel Whitmore. He looked surprised and a little wary to see her standing there. "Mrs. Carroll? I'm sorry to bother you," she said, holding out the box. "These are Brandon's things. I just wanted to make sure someone actually received them. I'll go now. I don't want to cause any more trouble." "Actually," Daniel said, stepping aside and holding the door open, "Mom and I were just going through Brandon's room ourselves. There's something you should see. Please, come in." "Your father warned me to be gone before he returns," Linda said, hesitating on the doorstep. Daniel's expression hardened, a flash of defiance in his eyes. "Don't worry about him, please." Against her better judgment, drawn in by the unexpected invitation, Linda stepped inside. The house was even more impressive, more intimidating than she remembered from the few times she'd dropped Melissa off. Marble floors gleamed under a soaring vaulted ceiling from which a massive crystal chandelier hung. Expensive abstract artwork adorned every wall. It was a beautiful house, but it felt cold, more like a museum than a home. Daniel led her up a grand curved staircase to a hallway lined with closed doors. He opened one, revealing Brandon's room. Eleanor Whitmore looked up from where she was kneeling on the floor beside a half-packed box. Her usual composed, almost regal expression softened when she saw Linda, her eyes filled with a shared maternal grief. "Linda, thank you for bringing Brandon's things." "Of course," Linda said, setting her box down and noticing several others already packed and labeled on the floor. "I see you're doing the same thing I did today." "It seemed like time," Eleanor said quietly, her voice fragile, "especially after this morning." Linda's gaze fell upon a smaller open box on the bed filled with items she recognized instantly. Melissa's silver-backed hairbrush, a small jewelry box Linda had given her for her 16th birthday, a few of her favorite books. "I'll take her things with me if that's all right," Linda said, her voice thick with emotion. "Thank you for keeping them safe," Daniel interrupted, his voice holding a strange new tension. He picked up an ornate dark velvet box from Brandon's desk. "This is what we wanted to show you." Linda accepted the box, noting its expensive weight and the quality of the fabric. She lifted the lid. Inside, nestled in a bed of pristine white satin, lay a lingerie set of exquisite black lace, clearly costly and utterly intimate. A small cream-colored card was tucked into a silk loop on the inside of the lid. Linda picked it up. In a bold, masculine handwriting, it read simply, "From Otis." "Otis?" Linda looked up, her brow furrowed in confusion. "I don't know anyone named Otis. Melissa never mentioned a man by that name." "Neither do we," Eleanor said, her voice barely a whisper. "That's why we thought you might know. We found it in the back of Brandon's closet, hidden behind a stack of old shoes." They all stared at the intimate gift, the air in the opulent room suddenly thick with unspoken, troubling thoughts. If some unknown man named Otis had given this to Melissa, why did Brandon have it? Had he intercepted it? Had Melissa shown it to him? "The lingerie is brand new," Daniel observed, pointing to the small, crisp tags still attached to the lace. "It's never been worn. And look, it still has the price tag from the store. $200. That was a lot of money, even back in 1985. "Why would Brandon keep this?" Linda asked, her mind racing, trying to piece together a puzzle with a crucial missing piece. "If some other man was sending my daughter expensive, intimate gifts like this, and that doesn't make sense." "That's what we can't understand," Eleanor said, shaking her head slowly. "Brandon was the jealous type. He had a temper. If he found this, he would have confronted this Otis person. He would have caused a scene. He wouldn't have just hidden the evidence away in his closet." Linda closed the lid of the velvet box with a decisive snap. "We need to take this to Detective Pram," she said, a new resolve hardening her voice. "This could be important. This could be a lead." "I agree," Daniel said immediately. "I'll come with you to the police station." Eleanor nodded, her face pale. "I'll stay here in case Gregory returns. He won't be pleased about this, about us talking to you, about any of it. But the police need to know." Linda gathered the small box containing Melissa's belongings while Daniel carefully placed the velvet box into a clean paper bag. As they prepared to leave the quiet, sad room, Linda couldn't shake the feeling that this mysterious Otis, whoever he was, might hold the key to understanding what had really happened to her daughter and his son that long ago summer. They walked out of the house and toward the garage, Daniel leading the way through the cavernous, silent home. The Whitmore garage was more like a luxury car showroom than a place for tools and lawnmowers. It was climate-controlled, spotlessly clean, with polished concrete floors and designated spaces for 6 vehicles. Daniel's sleek silver BMW sat in the third bay, and he had just pulled his keys from his pocket when they heard the distinctive, powerful rumble of Gregory's Mercedes pulling into the long, circular driveway. Linda's stomach dropped. "Your father's back already." "It's fine," Daniel said, but his jaw had tightened, a flicker of apprehension in his eyes. Gregory was out of his car before the engine had fully died, his face flushed with anger as he strode towards them. "What the hell is she still doing here? Daniel, what are you doing with this woman?" "Dad, calm down," Daniel said, his tone placating but firm. "We found something important in Brandon's room." He held up the paper bag containing the velvet box. "Mom and I were packing his thing." "And you're taking it where?" Gregory interrupted, his eyes narrowing with suspicion. "To show the media? To embarrass our family further?" "To the police," Daniel said firmly. "It's evidence." Gregory's face darkened, his expression shifting from anger to a more guarded, calculating look. "Evidence of what? Let me see it." Daniel reluctantly handed over the bag. Gregory yanked out the velvet box, his expression shifting from suspicion to contempt as he saw the contents. "Lingerie? You're taking a box of lingerie to the police? Are you insane?" "Look at the card," Linda interjected, unable to stay silent. "It's from someone named Otis. Neither Eleanor nor I know who that is." "And you think this is relevant? How?" Gregory snapped, his gaze dismissive. "Dad, we should have shown this to you first," Daniel said, clearly trying to de-escalate the situation. "But you were in such a rush this morning. You said you had to go and get grandmother's anxiety medication." "Which I did," Gregory said, patting the pocket of his jacket. "That doesn't explain why you're conspiring with her." He jerked his head disdainfully toward Linda. "No one is conspiring, Dad. Daniel said, a note of weariness creeping into his voice. We found this hidden in Brandon's closet. Don't you think that's strange? Some unknown man sending Melissa expensive lingerie and Brandon hiding it? You called me this morning to help you pack Brandon's room, and I told you I was busy, Gregory said, deflecting the question. Where exactly did you find this? Behind a stack of shoes on the top shelf of his closet. Dad, Daniel pressed, do you know who Otis is? Gregory's hesitation was brief, almost imperceptible, but Linda saw it. A flicker of something, recognition, evasion, in his eyes before his mask of indignant authority slammed back into place. How would I know every single person my son associated with? Maybe this Otis person was one of Melissa's old boyfriends. Who knows? Who cares? We're taking it to the police, Daniel said with a tone of finality that surprised Linda. They need to know about this. Fine, Gregory said, his voice clipped. Fine, but I'm coming with you. And I'm driving. Give me your keys, Dad. Your keys, Daniel, now. Daniel, looking defeated, handed over the keys to his BMW. Gregory turned to Linda. You'll follow in your own vehicle. We are not carpooling like some kind of dysfunctional family outing. Linda, biting back a sharp retort, simply nodded. At the Homestead police station, they were informed that Detective Pram was still in the field, coordinating the expanded search at the Everglades site. A younger, sharp-eyed officer whose badge read Martinez took their information, his demeanor professional and serious. We'll log this into evidence immediately, Officer Martinez assured them, carefully handling the velvet box with gloved hands as if it were a delicate, explosive device. The detective will want to see this as soon as he returns. What can you do with it? Daniel asked, his curiosity overriding his tension. Several things, the officer explained. We'll dust for fingerprints, though the fabric of the box and the card might make that challenging. We'll also run a check on our local and state databases for anyone with the first name Otis in this area. Homestead isn't that big, and Otis isn't exactly a common name. Linda noticed the officer examining the small tags on the lingerie more closely through the evidence bag. This is from Eloise's boutique over in Coral Gables. It's a very high-end place. They might have purchase records even from as far back as 1985. Some of these exclusive shops keep meticulous client information. That's good, Daniel said, a flicker of hope on his face. Anything that might help identify this person. Throughout the entire conversation, Gregory's cell phone, a new, sleeker model than Linda's, rang repeatedly. Each time he would glance at the screen, his expression growing more agitated, and immediately silence the call. Sir, do you need to take that? Officer Martinez asked politely after the fourth interruption. Number, it's just business, Gregory said tersely, his fingers drumming an impatient rhythm on the counter. Daniel frowned, looking at his father with concern. Dad, if it's urgent. I said it's fine, Gregory snapped, his voice echoing slightly in the quiet station. They completed the necessary evidence forms, each providing their name, address, and contact information. As they walked back out into the bright, humid air of the parking lot, Gregory's phone rang yet again. For God's sake, Dad, just answer it, Daniel said, his patience clearly exhausted. Is it from the office? Gregory fumbled with his words, his usual articulate confidence deserting him. Number, I mean, yes, it's complicated. Look, we need to get home. I have matters to attend to at the office. We still need to finish packing Brandon's room, Daniel reminded him. And Mrs. Carroll needs to collect Melissa's belongings. Whatever. She can follow us back and get them, Gregory said impatiently. You'll ride with me. Actually, Dad, Daniel said, an idea seeming to form. Since you need to go to the office, why don't you take my car there? I'll ride back to the house with Mrs. Carroll. We can finish packing while you handle your business. Gregory's phone buzzed once more, a persistent, demanding vibration. This time, as he pulled it from his pocket, Linda caught a fleeting glimpse of the screen. There was no name, just a string of numbers. Gregory declined the call with a gesture of visible frustration. Fine, whatever. I need to deal with this. Gregory fumbled for Daniel's keys in his pocket, his movements jerky and agitated. As he pulled them out, another smaller keychain fell from his pocket, landing on the hot asphalt with a sharp metallic clink. Linda's eyes were drawn to it immediately. Among the collection of keys was one with a small white plastic label. She could clearly make out a capital O at the beginning, but before she could read the rest, Gregory snatched it up with a speed that belied his age. "Dad, what was that?" Daniel asked. "Nothing, just keys to the office storage units," Gregory said, pocketing the keychain quickly, too quickly. "I'll take your car to the office. You two do whatever you need to do, just don't take all day." He strode to Daniel's BMW without another word, leaving Linda and Daniel standing in the sun-drenched parking lot, a cloud of unspoken questions hanging between them. "Your father seems stressed," Linda observed carefully, her voice neutral. Daniel sighed, running a hand through his hair. "He's been like this for years. Ever since Brandon disappeared, he just throws himself into his work, snaps at everyone. Mom says it's how he processes his grief, but..." He shrugged, leaving the sentence unfinished. "Shall we head back? I'm sorry you have to drive all this way again." "It's no problem," Linda said, though her mind was still replaying the image of that keychain. Had she imagined it? Or had there been more letters after that O? And why had Gregory reacted with such frantic haste to dropping it? They arrived back at the Whitmore estate 20 minutes later. As Linda pulled her Honda into the grand circular driveway, she noticed a man standing in the open garage near Gregory's Mercedes. He was middle-aged, trim, and wearing a crisp white shirt and dark slacks, the unofficial uniform of high-end domestic staff. "That's Ray Delane," Daniel explained as they got out of the car. "Dad's driver. He's been with him for years. Dad doesn't always need him, but he calls him whenever he has important errands." Ray approached them, a warm, genuine smile on his face that seemed out of place in the tense atmosphere of the day. He was perhaps in his early 50s, with salt and pepper hair and kind, intelligent eyes that crinkled at the corners when he smiled. "Mr. Daniel, good to see you." "Hey, Ray," Daniel shook his hand. "This is Mrs. Carroll, Melissa's mother." "Ma'am," Ray nodded respectfully, his gaze direct and filled with a surprising empathy. "I'm very sorry for your troubles." "Thank you," Linda said, studying him. There was something comforting about his calm, professional demeanor, a stark and welcome contrast to Gregory's barely contained hostility. "Your father called," Ray explained to Daniel. "He asked me to take his car to the office for him and then drive your BMW back here. You know how he is about that Mercedes?" Daniel chuckled, a brief moment of levity. "God forbid anyone else touches it. Thanks for doing this, Ray." "No trouble at all, sir. I'll have it back here within the hour." They left Ray in the garage and headed back inside the cool, marble-floored house. Eleanor was in the living room, a sealed cardboard box at her feet. She looked up as they entered, her face showing the deep, weary strain of the day. "How did it go at the police station?" she asked, her voice hushed. "Fine, Mom. I'll fill you in later," Daniel said gently. He pointed to the box. "Is this Melissa's things?" "Everything I could find," Eleanor said, standing and smoothing the wrinkles from her silk skirt. "Some clothes, the jewelry, a few photographs, not much, really." They didn't have much time to accumulate things together. Linda accepted the box, her throat tightening as she held the last physical remnants of her daughter's brief marriage. In a gesture that surprised Linda, the usually reserved and formal Eleanor stepped forward and embraced her. It was not a stiff society hug, but a real one, the embrace of one grieving mother holding another. "I'm so sorry, Linda," Eleanor whispered, her voice thick with unshed tears. "I'm so sorry for Gregory's behavior earlier and always, really. We are both mothers who have lost our children. We should have supported each other instead of—" She pulled back, her eyes glistening with a moisture that she didn't bother to hide. "I hope the police find answers. Soon. We all deserve some kind of closure." "Thank you, Eleanor," Linda said, genuinely moved. "That means a lot." Daniel offered to walk her out to her car, but Linda declined. "I can manage. You should stay with your mother." She carried the box through the grand marble foyer and out the heavy front door. The late afternoon sun was harsh, making her squint as she walked toward her car parked in the driveway. She had just opened her trunk when she heard voices coming from near the front gate. It was Ray, Gregory's driver, and he was talking to someone, a younger man, maybe in his early 30s. Linda, her senses suddenly on high alert, pretended to arrange the box in her trunk, using the raised lid as a shield while she observed them in her peripheral vision. The younger man was stocky, with dark, slicked-back hair and a nervous, shifty energy. He kept glancing around the quiet, opulent street as if worried about being seen. As Linda got into her driver's seat and started to reverse, she got a better view of the man. He was wearing a gaudy gold chain necklace with large block-letter pendants. Even from this distance, she could make out a prominent, unmistakable O at the beginning. Her pulse quickened, a drumbeat of adrenaline in her ears. Was that an S at the end? She slowed her reversal, her eyes flicking to her rearview mirror, adjusting it for a better view. Ray had noticed the necklace, too. She saw him reach for it, his lips moving, his expression suddenly stern. The younger man stepped back, protesting, but Ray, with a surprising quickness, grabbed the chain. Through her partially open driver's side window, she caught fragments of their conversation, carried on the still afternoon breeze. "Boss said," Ray's voice was firm, commanding, "Don't wear this." The younger man protested again, his voice a whine, but Ray was already pulling the necklace up and over the man's head. Then, with a grip that belied his earlier gentle demeanor, Ray seized the man's arm and steered him forcefully toward Gregory's waiting Mercedes. Linda's hands trembled on the steering wheel, a cold dread washing over her. Every instinct she possessed screamed that something was terribly wrong. The name Otis on the card, the O and S on that necklace, the dropped keychain. It couldn't all be a coincidence. She continued backing out of the driveway, slowly, trying to appear casual and uninterested. But she kept her eyes glued to her rearview mirror, watching as Ray practically shoved the younger man into the passenger seat of the Mercedes. Ray got behind the wheel and the luxury car pulled out of the driveway with an unusual, almost furtive speed. Linda made a split-second, life-altering decision. Instead of turning left to head back toward her own quiet, safe neighborhood, she turned right, following the Mercedes at what she hoped was an inconspicuous distance. Her heart pounded against her ribs, a frantic rhythm of fear and determination. She was trying to process what she had just witnessed. Who was that man? Why did Ray, the trusted driver, seem so concerned about a piece of jewelry? And why did he mention the boss, presumably Gregory? Linda maintained a careful distance, letting another car, a minivan full of beachgoers, slip between her Honda and the Mercedes as they headed toward the main road. She had never followed anyone before in her life, had only seen it done in movies and on television shows. Every red light made her panic that she would lose them. Every turn required a split-second decision, a prayer that she was going in the right direction. The Mercedes headed not toward the Whitmore Industries office, but toward downtown Homestead's older business district. After 15 minutes of tense, nerve-wracking driving, it pulled into the parking lot of a modern two-story office building. A large polished brass sign out front read, "Whitmore Industries." Linda recognized it immediately. Everyone in Homestead knew Gregory Whitmore's powerful real estate development company. She parked across the street, finding a spot behind a large parked delivery truck that gave her a partial but clear view of the building's main entrance. Her hands shook as she turned off the engine, the sudden silence in the car deafening. What was she doing? What in God's name was she doing, following prominent, wealthy citizens around town like some kind of crazed private detective? But then she remembered the necklace, the letters O and S, Ray's urgent words about the boss. The Mercedes sat idling near the entrance, its engine a low, powerful hum. Within minutes, Gregory Whitmore himself emerged from the building, his stride long and purposeful. He was still wearing the same expensive clothes from the morning, but he looked even more agitated than before, constantly checking his watch as if on a tight, critical schedule. Ray got out of the driver's seat as Gregory approached. Linda watched, her heart in her throat, as they exchanged keys. Ray handed over the keys to the Mercedes and accepted the keys to Daniel's BMW in return. Gregory slid into the driver's seat of his beloved Mercedes while Ray walked over to the BMW, which was parked in a reserved spot near the building. The younger man, Otis, she was now certain it was Otis, remained in the Mercedes's passenger seat, his head down. Both cars pulled out of the lot. The BMW turned left, presumably heading back to the Whitmore estate in Gables. The Mercedes turned right, heading south. Linda waited a beat, letting a few cars pass, then pulled out and followed. They were leaving Homestead's commercial district behind, passing through residential neighborhoods that grew sparser and more rural with each passing mile. Soon they were on US 1, heading south toward Florida City, the gateway to the Keys and the Everglades. Linda's confusion grew. Where could they possibly be going? Then Gregory's Mercedes took the familiar, dreaded turnoff, the entrance to Everglades National Park, the very same route she had driven that morning in a state of shock and grief. Linda's chest tightened, a band of ice closing around her heart. Why? Why would Gregory bring this mysterious young man back here to the scene of the crime? She let several tourist vehicles get between them as they passed through the park's entrance gate. The afternoon sun cast long, dramatic shadows across the vast sawgrass prairies, painting the landscape in hues of gold and deep green. The tourist traffic was lighter than it had been in the morning, but it still provided enough cover for her to follow without being too obvious. Gregory's car pulled into the parking lot of the Ernest F. Coe Visitor Center. Linda found a spot at the far end of the lot behind a large, hulking RV where she could observe them without being easily seen. She watched as Gregory and the young man exited the vehicle. Gregory said something, his gestures sharp and commanding, and they headed toward one of the marked nature trails. Linda waited a full, agonizing minute, her mind racing before getting out of her own car. She grabbed a park brochure from her glove compartment and held it open, trying to look like just another lost tourist consulting a map. The main trail, a paved walkway, was busy enough that she could maintain a safe distance without seeming suspicious. For the first half hour, they followed the standard tourist path. Linda paused frequently, pretending to photograph wading birds in the shallow water, or to examine the unique vegetation, all the while keeping their figures in her sights. The landscape gradually began to change, the lush wetlands giving way to a rockier, drier terrain. A weathered wooden sign indicated they were entering the Long Pine Key region. The elevation increased subtly, the ground beneath her feet shifting from soft earth to hard, exposed limestone, and scattered, resilient pine trees replaced the dense sawgrass. From certain vantage points, Linda could see the vast, swampy areas stretching out to the horizon, a breathtaking and intimidating panorama. The contrast was striking. dry rocky ridges rising like ancient islands from the endless watery prairie. A few other tourists dotted the trail ahead and behind her. But as the afternoon wore on and the sun began its slow descent toward the horizon, their numbers dwindled until she felt a growing, prickling sense of isolation. Her unease grew with every step. The deeper they went, the more isolated it became. Then she saw it. Gregory and his companion veered sharply off the main marked trail, disappearing into the dense undergrowth onto an unmarked, almost invisible path. Linda's heart raced, pounding a frantic tattoo against her ribs. To follow them now meant abandoning the safety of the public spaces, venturing into the true, untamed wilderness. But she had come this far. She couldn't turn back now. She waited until they were almost out of sight. Then she, too, stepped off the path, pushing her way through the scratchy vegetation. The unofficial trail was rougher, more treacherous, requiring careful navigation over sharp limestone outcroppings and through dense, tangled thickets of brush. Sweat trickled down her back in the thick, humid air, and a cloud of mosquitoes buzzed relentlessly around her face. After another 20 minutes of difficult, silent hiking, she heard their voices up ahead. Linda slowed her pace, creeping forward, using a thick stand of sawgrass and a cluster of limestone boulders as cover. Her heart was a drum in her ears. Through a gap in the vegetation, she could see them. They were standing in a small, secluded clearing on a dry ridge, surrounded by pine trees and scrub. They were completely, utterly alone out here. "Point to the exact spot," Gregory's voice, cold and devoid of any emotion, carried clearly in the still, heavy air. "I need to know precisely where you buried the bitch's body. If the police get close to this area, I need to be prepared." Linda's blood ran cold. She pressed herself lower behind the rough, sharp rocks, barely daring to breathe. Her body rigid with a horror so profound it was almost paralyzing. The younger man, Otis, walked a few paces to a section of ground that was heavy with brush and tangled undergrowth. He kicked at a patch of dirt with the toe of his shoe. "Here," he said, his voice flat, matter-of-fact. "I buried Melissa right here, 6 feet down, just like you said. The limestone was tough, but we got through it, with the tools you gave us." The casual, almost bored way he said her daughter's name, the way he spoke of her burial as if it were a completed chore, made Linda bite down hard on her lower lip to keep from crying out, from screaming her rage and grief into the silent wilderness. Her baby was here, right there, under that patch of dirt in this God-forsaken wilderness. "Good. Leave it undisturbed," Gregory said, surveying the area with a cold, calculating expression. "No one would stumble across this spot accidentally. You'd have to know exactly where to look." "What about me?" Otis's voice changed, taking on a pleading, whining tone. "You said you'd help me. The police found the car. That lingerie gift. You were stupid to use your real name on that card," Gregory snapped, his voice sharp with contempt. "I told you to woo the girl, to make Brandon jealous enough to leave her, not to send her expensive lingerie with a signed card that he would obviously keep. You said to make it convincing, and it was your idea in the first place." "Enough!" Gregory held up a hand, silencing him. "I have an offer for you. You have 2 choices. 1, you disappear. Leave Florida tonight. Go to another state. Change your name. Never contact anyone here again. But if you choose that, I won't give you a single cent." Otis started to protest, but Gregory continued, his voice like ice. 2, you go to the police. You confess that you murdered the Newlyweds. You tell them you were Melissa's obsessive ex-boyfriend, crazy with jealousy. You followed them. You killed them both. You buried their bodies and you sank the car in the Everglades. You take full and complete responsibility. "Why would I do that?" Otis asked, his voice a mixture of fear and disbelief. "Because I will pay you $300,000 to do it," Gregory said calmly. The money will be placed in an offshore account that your family can access while you're in prison. You will give everyone, the police, the families, the media, closure. You will stop the investigation cold. You will never ever mention my name or my company's. And when you get out, you'll be a rich man. My father won't agree to this, Otis said weakly. You're not a child anymore, Otis. Make your own damn decision. As for your prison time, I have connections. You won't serve as long as you think. Linda watched in abject horror as Otis, after a long, silent moment, slowly, almost imperceptibly nodded his head. Okay, he said, his voice barely audible. Okay, I'll do it. For the money. Smart choice, Gregory said, a hint of satisfaction in his tone. Now let's go. It's getting late. They turned to head back the way they had come. Linda's mind was a maelstrom of shock, grief, and frantic thought. She needed to call the police, immediately. But not until they were far enough away that they wouldn't hear her. She pressed herself deeper into the vegetation, making herself as small as possible, as their heavy footsteps grew closer, past her hiding spot, and then gradually began to fade into the distance. When she was absolutely certain they were gone, Linda pulled out her cell phone with trembling, clumsy hands. The signal was weak, just 2 flickering bars on the small screen, but it would have to do. She dialed Detective Pram's direct number, the one he had given her on his business card, praying that the call would connect. It went through, though a loud crackle of static filled the line. "Detective, it's Linda Carroll." She spoke quickly, her voice a harsh, urgent whisper, afraid of losing the fragile connection. "I'm at Everglades National Park, the Long Pine Key area. I followed Gregory Whitmore here. He's with a man named Otis. I heard everything. Otis buried Melissa's body here. Gregory is paying him to take the blame for both murders. Mrs. Carroll, what you've done is extremely dangerous." The detective's voice was urgent, cutting through the static. "Give me your exact location. Stay on the line if you can." Linda, her voice shaking, described the trail, the unofficial turnoff, the landmarks she had noticed, the cluster of boulders, the clearing on the ridge. "They're heading back to the visitor center parking lot right now. Gregory is trying to cover everything up. We're mobilizing units now. Stay where you are. Stay hidden," Pram commanded. "We'll be there as fast as we possibly can." The line went dead. Linda stared at the phone, then at the desolate patch of ground Otis had indicated. Her daughter was there, had been there for 12 years. So close and yet so impossibly far, hidden in this vast, indifferent wilderness. Tears, hot and silent, finally streamed down her face as she began to carefully, quietly make her way back toward the main trail. She had to be careful. She had to avoid Gregory and Otis. She had to trust that Detective Pram and his officers would arrive in time. But at least now, after 12 long years of agonizing uncertainty, she knew. The truth, as horrible and monstrous as it was